y'all, it's Sarah. I have some more of the blue and white pieces that I wanted to share with you guys. This is going to be a slightly larger piece. And maybe not something for everyone, but hopefully it's got some ideas in it that might trigger something for you. So I've got a few things laying out here to get started with. And of course, the first thing is always going to be my Readi-board brand foam core sheeting. For those of you not familiar, this is something found in your office supply, school supply area, right next to regular poster boards. It usually runs $1 or less, and I typically find mine at Dollar Tree, but you can also find it at Dollar General and Walmart and places like that. So it's going to take about 2 sheets overall to do this project, and it's going to be a pretty good size overall piece. I can't tell you the exact final measurements, and you'll see why as we go through this. But about 2 sheets, I think, is roughly what it's going to take to get this entire piece finished out. A couple other things. So one of my pieces is going to be at the full 30-inch width or length by 20-inch width. I've got 2 little strips, and this seems kind of crazy, but these are going to extend my piece right where I need them to. So I've got 2 30-inch strips that are only 3/4 of an inch wide. I've got 4 1-inch strips that I'm going to be using for my frame. So if you're interested in the wood techniques, the wood painting techniques for the foam core, those are their own videos. That way you can go in and really customize every craft that I happen to show. If this isn't the style for you, you can go in and pick what it is that you want to frame yours out with and run from there. Next thing is more foam core, and I've cut mine down into 4.5 by 4.5 little squares. And depending on how large you want to go with your piece and how far you want to take this, it is probably going to take about 14 squares to finish this whole project. I've got a whole bunch of these because if you've seen, I already did a couple other projects. So I think it's going to take me about 14 of these completed to do my project. I've got just some plain white duct tape. I am using, shocker guys, I'm using an acrylic paint. However, I am using an acrylic enamel. You can see right here, this is a gloss paint. So this almost works like mixing an acrylic with wax. That gloss texture is what helps me apply directly to my foam core without a lot of damage. And I'm using Real Blue. Waverly's chalk paint in the color Ocean would work for this. It was a slightly smokier blue to me. So whatever blue kind of appeals to you, or whatever color for this appeals to you. So I've got my Dollar Tree paint dauber. I have got this Dollar Tree stencil, and if you've watched the other blue and white videos, you'll recognize it already. This is like a spin kind of stencil wheel, and I took mine apart because I found it easier this way. You can leave yours together. I think they do it this way so that you already have like a little section that masks off while you're stenciling, but I honestly found it easier this way. This one says assorted, and I don't know if they all say assorted. I know that this is the pattern I have. Now I kind of really want to check and see what other patterns they have, and that really is kind of a personal choice too. This other thing, guys, I have not figured out a good way to record mirrors without blinding you guys because of where my lighting is for, not really even for filming purposes, but for my own ability to see. So I'm going to try not to blind you. This is one of the Dollar Tree mirrors. And I think these are roughly like 8 by 11, 8 by 10, somewhere around in that. Let me see really quick. The mirror itself is 8 by 10, and the entire piece is about 9.5 by 11.5. So it's that size mirror, whichever mirror, honestly, you want to kind of run with this idea with. So to keep from blinding you guys, all I've done was I took everything apart. I pulled this backer off. I flipped my mirror upside down so that I wouldn't blind you guys. And there was another reason I did this. I'm going to go ahead and paint this frame. If you notice, that white of the frame is slightly off from the white of my foam core. So I'm just going to come in with the Waverly chalk paint in the color white and kind of roughly go over this and brighten it up about the same whiteness of our foam core. And I want to do that part really quick. That way it just blends and we have time for it to be drying while we're working on everything else. So I'm just going to come in. Since I have this flipped upside down, I don't have to even mask anything off. I'm not having to tape any of this off. We're just going to go straight in and go over this. You could paint it any color. Honestly, I could go in and do the blue that I'm going to be using, and I think that would pop on here also. You could do it in maybe whatever wood tone that you plan on doing your outer portion of your frame in. And you can see that is only a hair difference in the shade of white, but it's just enough to kind of blend this framing in with that foam core, because we're going to be using the white of the foam core kind of to work with this craft. So there we go. Only one coat. Not a big deal. Like I said, it was mostly just to kind of brighten that up just a hair. It was an off-white, and I really wanted a white. We're going to set that to the side. It's going to be drying. We won't need to apply this until later. So, while we're playing with paint, I'm going to go ahead and let these pieces get to drying. And I'm only going to show you a couple of them. I've actually sat, because I really enjoy this process for some reason, I already sat and did a whole bunch of these. Now, if you're not using a blue, that is a gloss that's going to kind of help protect. Now, mind you, I've mentioned before, the smaller the piece is, the better it seems to hold up when we paint it with regular paints and things like that. The bigger it is, the more of a chance we have for a piece to break down. I know that sounds a little contradictory to some of the things that I usually say. Somehow it works out that way. Now, the gloss in this is helping me apply to these pieces without any problem. But I did go ahead and put in a little of my clear to show you guys, if you're not using something like this, just to be on the safe side, always mix a little of your clear in with your paints in order to help just kind of protect your surface. This one, I think, as small of a scale as we're doing, and the fact that we're stenciling such a light layer of paint on these, I really truly think that it should hold up fairly well. I haven't had any problems so far, but I always like to err to the side of caution so that you guys know, hey, this is a fickle little material, to take a little extra care with it. So, my little stencils here, with this 4.5, they work out wonderfully. And you could do these whatever size you really wanted to, but if you notice, it ends up coming up and really lining along these edges just right. So it almost looks like they were made to fit. And once this has paint on it, you'll see what I mean. So I'm not going to do the traditional pouncy way that we do stenciling. I'm not going to tape these down. I am not making this any more difficult than it has to be. And you'll see that my results have a kind of handcrafted look, and I like that. If that's not your thing, use some tape, use whatever you use to hold stencils down and hold yours in place and secure it. And maybe do, I have shown before about doing the clear first and sealing off the edges of a stencil, any of those things. But this look really does take this very well. So I'm just going to kind of get my paint on here fairly evenly, since I just loaded my brush. or my dauber. And this one is kind of messy. If you want to wear gloves, you might want to, because I'm just holding it in place, so it does get a little messy. So mostly you can see I've just basically kind of got my paint in place. And all I'm going to do, I know this is kind of cringy. This is not typically how you do a stencil. These stencils are fairly thick, so it does kind of work out nicely this way. As long as you don't let it shift on you. I've been using it up against my desk where my little stoppers are down here at the bottom of my desk, but you guys can't see when I pull something that far down. So it's a little more likely to slide on me. So here we go, and you can kind of see where it slid, and I'm still okay with that. Like I said, this whole set of blue tiles that I've been playing with, I really wanted that rustic handcrafted version of blue tiles. I haven't even loaded my sponge again. It's going to give me some slight variations in my shades of blue. Slide that back in place there. And you can see how nice. The only pattern I didn't use is kind of this basket weave pattern. And honestly, if you look at that, it ended up giving a whole lot of just mostly blue. So it just, I don't know, it didn't end up being a pattern that I wanted to use. And I'm just using the stencil's natural kind of alignment to decide where it's going on my little squares. You notice I still have not reloaded my brush or my dauber. I'm just smushing around all the paint that's already loaded on this thing. And every little shade of blue tends to be slightly different. And when you usually see this blue and white print, you notice that it has several shades of blue in it typically. So I ended up liking that it had the different varieties. So we're going to let these dry, because more than likely you're going to end up like this, even if you're wearing gloves. And because we want this white background, we don't want any transference. We don't want to get paint on our surface and rub it around, have it on our fingers and rub it around. So give all of these pieces a good opportunity to dry before we start putting the construction together. Okay, y'all, I've pretty much given all my things a chance to dry to the side, and I can go ahead and start construction on this. Now, here is one of the things when I said I was going to have these weird little 3/4 inch strips. This is not really necessary, but visually, to balance this piece out to the space that I wanted it to fit, I needed just a little bit more. You don't have to do this. You can still scoot your tiles closer together and try to use your surface the way that it is, at the size that it is. But I went ahead and added these two pieces to my sides on each side, just using white duct tape. And honestly, using the duct tape probably wasn't even necessary, because the way we're going to glue these down should be pretty secure for it. But for me, I took that extra step and went ahead and taped it on there on the back side. And you see it still has some move, but like I said, the way that we're going to glue this together, it's going to secure it up for us pretty well. And it's not even really going to be necessary to have that, but I always, you guys know that I kind of err to the side of caution when I'm doing these things. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that piece that I've already put together. I struggled with my duct tape. I didn't want you guys to see that. I was using a really old roll, and I had some problems, so it's kind of wrinkled on the back. Don't judge me for that, but we're going to go ahead and start laying out how this is going to look. And I know that a lot of it's not going to fit in the screen. Maybe I can do it sideways and feel like I'm still seeing it visually. So part of what I said about how this is going to work out is I did 3/4 of an inch. And this piece right here is a full inch. So there's like a 1/4 inch overhang that is going to adhere those two pieces when we put our border on. It gave me just enough room to add a frame and get the spacing that I really wanted. So once I glue this in place, none of that is really going to budge, especially as heavy as I tend to go with my hot glue. And one of the things that I'm going to do really quickly, and I tell you guys to be very careful when you do things like this, and you can get away with it, especially if you've got a glue gun that you can change temperatures on. I do happen to have one that allows me to change temperatures. Your foam can shrink up inside there. On this piece, it'll be okay because the way they're going to bump together. But just for a little extra security, I'm going to go ahead and pop a little bit of glue down in this little kind of crease there. That's why I said it was the duct tape step was not entirely a necessity, but I do like to show those things. It's still a good tip for later if you want to go much larger with a piece and want to expand a piece. It's still the same logic. So same thing here. I just have this bent down, and I'm honestly, most of my glue is going kind of right on the duct tape itself, where I can see it right as that crease comes in. And there we go. Security-wise, this is no problem. I've done a couple of things like this and had it work out fine. I am not cutting my frame pieces down yet, and you'll kind of see why. When we get to lining this up to make it visually work out, we've got to kind of manipulate the tiles a little bit because the math doesn't technically work out for this, but visually we can make it work out. So pretty much I'm at least dry fitting so that as I start to bring my tiles in, I know where I'm going to put them. Now you can go either way with this as far as doing your framing. However, normally where I like to miter, when we're adjoining pieces like this, sometimes doing the blunt frame like this where they kind of butt up against one another is more useful. However, the way that this is, and as small as this piece is, if you want to go ahead and miter your pieces, that's absolutely going to work too. And I haven't even decided. I'm just kind of putting them there to hold their place for me. And I'm going to grab my tiles. So I've got my nice stack of tiles, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my mirror. And remember, guys, this is a mirror. I just have it flipped upside down as to not blind you all. So basically, we're going to beef this mirror up quite a bit. And you'll see what I mean about the math does not entirely work out. It works out widthwise, but not lengthwise. So we're going to play around with that so that it does work out for us. And I'm going to go ahead and jump a step just out of convenience. You know that I tend to want to do my framing all at one time. However, for this particular one, I want to go ahead and put my bottom frame piece in just so that it doesn't slide around on me, just so I can kind of start laying out from here. So I'm going to go ahead and miter my edges. And to do that, I want to show you guys really quick that the measurement that you need for this is from edge to edge of whatever piece you're framing. So I will trim this down to this length and miter from there. So I've now popped my miter piece in place here at my bottom, and went ahead and jumped ahead on a couple of my other miters, but I still wanted to show you how that's done. And there is a video for doing framing, mitered edges, finishing out your pieces, that kind of thing. So really quickly, whatever your frame piece is going to be, width-wise, so I'm going to have a 1 inch wide frame. I'm going to come over and measure over 1 inch also, which means I have a perfect square on this bottom section. To miter any of those, I'm just going to come across on a diagonal from corner to corner. And that gives me a perfect 45-degree miter. And you want to do that, and I probably should show you. I have been getting a little more detailed in showing that here recently. And I keep wanting to do that because I know people are struggling. So I'm going to do the very same thing. Now, you want your long edge to be along the same edge. So I'm going to come over again, make myself a perfect square. And I want my longest part to go on that same edge. And that's what I mean about having our longest portions on the same edge, and then our shorter portions will be on the same edge. So, hope that helps a little bit on that. You put these away. Okay, so I've brought everything back over. I have just got everything dry fitted, and you'll see why I did this and why I did things the way that I did. The measurements work this way for sure. It's the other direction that we have to play with, and I've got a little cheat that I did for that. And I'm just kind of sliding these sort of in place. The static electricity keeps twisting this one on me. So a little cheat that I did, I went ahead and took some of my less than perfect, and none of mine were meant to be perfect, guys. You can see they are not perfect. I took some of the less than ones that had some really kind of issues, where I'd actually gotten paint along the sides and that kind of thing. I trimmed these down. So they are now 4.5 inches by 4. Where these that you see laid out right now are the 4.5 by 4.5. So I did this to help the math line up, but visually with all this pattern, our brain is not even really going to notice that. So I'm going to work on the alignment, and you'll see what I mean about having to play with this to get it to work with this mirror. And you can line up your patterns really any which way you want to. I'm just kind of rotating them out. I want a variety. I didn't want to have any of the same pattern next to one another. And now as you look at that, you kind of realize what I mean, that our brain is not really noticing that much that we took that 1/2 inch off of these pieces. So I'm just going to pick a couple pieces here to go across my top. And I'm still rotating out colors. I'm still trying to keep that part in mind. And now you see why I said I couldn't give you an exact measurement, because part of it's going to depend on how you guys space your tiles out, because I'm not going to use anything to really measure mine out. But I do want to show you something that you can measure out with. So let's see, I need, and I think that balances my pattern pretty good. I was busy talking and not looking at my patterns. So a couple ways that you can do this on getting these spaced out or feeling confident about spacing them out is just take some piece of scrap foam core and use that as your spacer type material. For instance, here at the bottom, I feel like I could use this at this double width of thickness, if you guys can see that. And I feel like that's probably a pretty good spacing for the bottom. However, I may end up having a slightly different spacing throughout the rest of it. The one thing that does work out and that really is helpful is these two here and these two here. If we align them for sure with this long portion of the mirror, it'll be a lot easier to get everything else kind of looking like it's in alignment, if you see what I'm talking about. So these are going to be my first two that I'm going to adhere down. And like I showed, I'm just going to cheat. Put these right here as a spacer. And then I'm going to grab another little one to stick there. Against this side to know that I've got this guy butted up as close to the mirror as I can. And it's not necessary to go through all this. You could measure it all out with a ruler and lightly sketch on there where you want to lay it out. So I'm going to pop this there. And it's almost like we just kind of made our own compatible T-square. And with at least having two here and there that we know for sure are aligned nicely, everything else can kind of fall in place from there. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing a little bit of gluing. Okay, so I've gotten most of my tiles pretty much adhered. And you can see here, this is what I was talking about, that there would be just a little bit offset with the math and the numbers on this. However, I felt like it almost kind of bulked the look of the mirror frame anyway. I have not glued my mirror down simply because I have it turned around, so that's going to be the last thing that I do because I won't be able to show it with the actual mirror. So I won't be able to glue mine down at the moment, since I'll need to be able to detach it and flip it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the next couple of things. Now that I know exactly where they were going to line up when I kind of elongated this look a little bit, I went ahead, because I knew that my little space down here was one full width of my little framing pieces sideways, and then I'd use these two stacked up on each other to do my spacer. I turned around, popped down here, laid them out like that, and went ahead and marked that. And it will vary from individual to individual slightly. Guys, I've got flies in here from having the windows open. They're driving me crazy. But it will vary a little bit from individual to individual, depending on how much you kind of space these apart to work around your mirror. So my next step is just to come in, and I'm going to go ahead and trim this whole little section off so that we can get into the framing. Okay, so I went ahead and trimmed mine down, and it came out to an exact 25 inches. I'm kind of shocked about that because the first time I measured it out, dry fitting everything, it actually came to like 24 and something. So that's why I wasn't real specific about the measurements on it. But here we go. Now, this is where I'm at, and I want to show you what I'm going to do next in order to do my framing. So, really quick, I had already dry fitted one end because I wasn't sure about this other end. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this down. And I will miter these other ends so that it fits. But before I glue them down, I wanted to show you guys what I did on my edges of this so that I wouldn't have any white showing through. And you see me do it when I stack pieces. But with this being a single layer piece, go ahead and whatever sponge or color that you typically would finish your edge with, when we're stacking them, go ahead and do the same thing, and be very careful, because this is where I struggle to not get fingerprints. But we want to go ahead and do this edge, and we want a little bit of kind of overrun on that, because when we stack this on here from the side, we won't be able to see any white. The best way I found to do this, and I won't do all of my edges on camera, is I bring it to the very edge of my desk and let it overhang an inch or two and hold it down and slide across, and I get a whole lot more control that way. It's hard to show that, but that's typically how I do these edges, a little more safely and not risk getting too far over on this. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I've given everything a chance to dry, and you can kind of see what I did here about hitting that edge. And the reason that I do that on this one in particular is so that with it only being too stacked thick, I won't have any white showing through. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere these down. And you'll see, I'm going to make sure that I put plenty of extra glue on here, since this is the section that we're working over that seam. So I've got it glued down right over that seam, and now you can see that we're right at the edge of that seam, and I'm just working all the way around, getting all of my pieces adhered down. I'm going to slide this one up in place, so I make sure that all my placement is looking pretty good. Same thing with this one, where it goes along this seam. I am really loading the back of this framing piece up all the way down with my glue, so that I make sure it bonds over that seam really nicely. And we're almost at the finish line, guys. And here we go. My last piece is ready to go in its place. And the only thing that I'll have left to do is, of course, place my mirror down. And that I can't do without hurting y'all's eyes. So I won't do that now. The last thing I'll do is kind of go in. And if I have any light spots here, you can see where these kind of join really nicely. There's no white showing through. I've got a spot here that looks like it didn't take my paint quite as well, or I didn't hit it quite as nice. I'll come in and do every bit of these edges a lot cleaner to make sure that they're blending all together. And that's it. We have a finished piece. This is still lightweight enough that you should be able to hang with command strips, even with the mirror involved, because we went so lightweight with our layers. And hopefully you guys can see how nice of a size piece this is. It ends up being, I think, probably about 22 inches-ish. Pretty close, 21 3/4 by 25. So this is a really nice piece to end up out of just a little 8x10 Dollar Tree mirror. So I hope that gives you some kind of idea, inspiration, or what not to do today. Whichever. And I